So those are the two most essential things up front in my mind is clarity around who you have in the company, your values, your goals, how you want to interact. Also, role clarity is huge in this and knowing who's going to be doing what, clarifying that up front, and then having a plan for check-in points because in startups, things change quickly. So checking in every few months, especially in the early stages, is about, is our vision still this? Is our goal still this? Do we still have the right roles? It matters a lot. So A, clarity about what you're doing, and then B, good leadership to manage that process and to manage the things as you go forward, thinking of the hypothesis, who's a strong leader, yet is also willing to step back.
What I'm seeing, visioning now, based on this, is let's say there's a team here, and it's a very diverse team. So two are pretty young people, very talented, and then there's a more senior person to make sure that you have the diversity, a higher age, more mature, better planner perhaps. And maybe this more mature person is the one suggesting to the team, let's talk about values, let's talk about our working style, our vision, mission. How, is this problem we're solving really something that can drive you, each of you, through all the ups and downs that we will have in front of us. And that could be the leader, the natural leader perhaps.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing then is probably a couple of younger people who would yeah, okay, if you think it's good to talk about it, let's talk about it. And after a couple of hours they get eager and want to get started on coding. So could that potentially be a conflict, turn into a conflict, that the diversity also leads to these different opinions on how to actually collaborate and work together. Is that something you see?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of layers of that. One is a situation in which a young startup brings in a more experienced CEO, and there's a lot of examples of that not working super well. What I mentioned earlier about the idea of a fault line, where there's multiple differences that separate people within a team. So if you bring in an older, more experienced person at a different layer of the hierarchy, there's a lot of things to divide that person from the people who are doing the programming, who are younger, who are less experienced. There's a huge gap between those two groups, and it makes it very hard to communicate across them in a way that's often not very effective. The more effective leadership situations I've seen either are young founders who are coached into good leadership and have more in common with their team because it's easier for them to speak in a language that people are going to get. A, and that can help resolve conflicts. B, and then if you do bring in a more senior CEO, having someone that deeply aligns at some level with the young employees, be it as someone who's a programmer themselves or just truly is very charismatic about believing in the product and vision, but you need some way to bridge those two groups in order for this discussion to work. That's A. So making sure that there is a way for the CEO and the employees to be on the same page. And then B, whenever you talk about these things, about values, about making a plan, and we have diversity more generally, you have the potential for conflicts to go wrong and for it not to be resolved, or for some people to think it's an issue and other people not. And so that's why understanding conflict dynamics, conflict resolution, negotiation, I think is a skill set that everybody should learn at some point in their lives. I mean, just in a nutshell, one of the key issues when you talk about things like this, like, what should we do with our business right now? That's a conflict. I think we should work on the product. I think we should make a plan. How do you resolve that? Is you need to keep it focused on the task and not on the people. If it becomes, well, you old person, you don't know what you're talking about, and you young startup guys, you also don't know what you're talking about, it becomes personal. And so you have to be able to truly talk about the issue in a way that doesn't reflect personal differences. And part of that comes from your communication style and self-awareness. Naturally, people, whenever there's disagreement and there's uncertainty that someone doesn't see the world the way that you do, you tend to make it about the person or about yourself. So 70% of the time that someone says something differently than what you think, you take it personally. And so you think, you stupid person, like, you don't get this. Like, we need a program. We need to get into this market now.
Yeah.
Or you think, gee, why doesn't he think that I'm doing my job well? Like, that really sucks. That makes me sad. And either way, it becomes personal when it doesn't need to be. is simply differences in perspective, and you can discuss that and resolve that. You present evidence of why we should make a plan versus evidence of why we should just be programming right now, and you weigh that evidence against one another, and then you make a decision about what to do. And that's not easy. I could get a lot more into conflict resolution later, but it gets a little bit derailed there. But
in terms of, I totally get what, and we see it all the time, isn't that right, in a lot of teams. I'm very quite obsessed about, at early stage to identify potential later problems. Because it's just so nice to lay out a plan and put together a team and wang, there we go. But so the potential fault lines and being able to map out a team, that at least theoretically would work out ideally. Is there a particular tool or research that you would point to that explains this in detail, so a team could pick it up and say, let's read this, let's study this, try to use it, try to implement it, to test ourselves, to map out our own teams, our own weaknesses and strengths?
The theory behind it, there's not much that's been written in the practitioner language about it. There's two key research articles. One is Lau and Murnion in 1998, the Academy of Management Review, introducing the notion. And then there was a review piece 2 or 3 years ago by Sherry Thatcher and Pankaj Patel in the Journal of Applied Psychology, where the review was spun down and concluded that indeed fault lines are pretty negative for performance. The easiest way to do this yourself as a team, and I've done this with teams and organizations a lot, and also when my teams in my startup class analyze team dynamics, I always make them do this, which is to draw a picture on a whiteboard of, say, like the 4 co-founders. And with different colored markers, draw who's different or who's similar. So if there's 2 people in the team that are females and 2 males, draw, a red circle around the 2 females and a red circle around the 2 males. And then say, okay, look at their educational background. Well, there's 2 programmers or 3 programmers and 1 business developer. So take your green pen, draw a circle around the 3 green programmers and a green circle around the single business development person. And do this for what you think are the most important forms of diversity in this team. And eventually, when you've gone through like 5 or 6 of these, you can sort of take a step back and look at the whiteboard. And what's very interesting then is in dysfunctional teams, you'll often see that systematically there's 1 or 2 people who don't have any circles tying them to other members. So they're systematically cut off from the rest of the team.
I see. That's
a behavioral way to look at this is easy to do in terms of, because one of the problems, the way that these fault lines are expressed is in terms of communication. And so if you ask people to rate on 1 to 5 how much they talk with everybody in the team, you can then draw a communication map to see how dark the lines are between everybody and who's communicating the most to who. So if 3 people all say they're communicating with 2 other people, among themselves, and another person says, well, actually I don't communicate with anybody very much, that's a good behavioral indicator of a fault line being there based on whatever characteristics. Also, if you're in the next team meeting, you can monitor it as well. Like, is everybody speaking openly? Are there certain people that talk more than others, and are there certain people who tend to always side with one another in meetings? Are there factions?
Right. And that brings in also that some are more dominant than others in conversations. Some come from cultures where it's not respectful to just speak out. You would rather wait until it's your turn. Yeah. Okay. I mean this diagram is a really, sounds to me like a very effective tool, easy to try out.
Yeah.
In any team. Just requires a whiteboard, which many would have anyway. Yeah. So sounds like a great recommendation to anyone to try that out. I guess also for existing teams that's been going for a while, that could maybe explain potential conflicts or problems in the team. You would map out what's going wrong, actually. Fantastic. In terms of the team dynamics in such a new team here, what are some of the typical problems related to the team dynamics? I think you have covered a couple of such problems. Are there any other typical problems you see a lot that we haven't covered in this talk?
I think let me give you like my laundry list of the main problems in order of importance that I see in dynamics. One is lack of clarity.
Yeah.
That you go into a startup and people are working on different things. They don't always fit together. They're not talking to one another, and they're not able to effectively put together their work. And they even have potentially different goals for what they want to do with the company. And this leads to all sorts of problems, of conflicts and power struggles and infighting and turnover. So lack of clarity and lack of intentionality by the founders to give clarity to their employees about what is our budget for the year, what are our roles, what are our goals and expectations for this company for the next year or two. Problem number one, most important problem. Problem number two is leadership, which I mentioned earlier, of not having clear leadership or having an autocratic, power centralizing crazy leader.
Yeah.
So intentionality and clarity, leadership issues. Third one is culture. So maybe you made a plan way back when and you have a decent leader, but you're so focused on the product that you haven't really thought about culture, about your office space and the norms of interaction, how you reward employees, how you hire employees. And so you're starting to hire people into your company that aren't always happy or not always getting along because you weren't intentional about culture and making sure that you're hiring based on culture. One of the great examples of how to do this well is Matt Mullenweg, who's the CEO at WordPress Automatic. And they're an entirely distributed organization. And that's not an easy way to work. And so whenever Matt brings somebody new into WordPress, and it's a big company at this point, so this is challenging, but he does several things. First, he puts the problem online that's very difficult to solve. And only people who've completed the problem can go to the next phase in the interview process because he wants to test if people are autonomous, which is a very important goal for his culture, that are autonomous and they're problem solvers. He then does the interview via Slack rather than face-to-face because he wants to see if they could communicate well in a virtual environment because otherwise they're not going to fit in, they're not going to be happy. Sorry, lights.
Yeah.
And he's very intentional about that. And so that's an example of doing it right. You often see a lot of examples of people doing it wrong. Who think, okay, we need to hire a programmer. Let's get the best programmer there is. And we don't really care what their personality is, what their work style is. We just want somebody who can program. So third problem, culture and lack of intentionality around culture. Going further. Unresolved conflicts and conflict dynamics would be problem number 4. That many times people found companies with people that they have deep relationships with, be it a brother, a spouse, a friend, someone they've known for a long time. And that can make for very difficult situations in which conflicts are often not expressed well, or if they are, they're expressed in a very emotional manner. There was one startup that I know of where it was a husband and wife who founded the startup together. And they had the problem that whenever they tried to discuss the business together, both of them took it very personally. It was very hard for them to separate the roles of husband and wife from their roles as co-founders. And so every time they would discuss things, it escalated. And of course, whenever the people are upset emotionally, emotions are contagious. So everybody, all the employees in the startup, then would get massively upset every time this husband and wife had a discussion. And so it was creating this really toxic work environment. So a startup consultant that I knew that was working with them, what she had them do is she had them tape a square on the floor of their office. Every time they needed to have a discussion about something they disagreed on based on the startup, they will walk into this square and they had to check their husband and wife roles at the door. In that square, they were just co-founders. Anything said or done could not be brought home. They had to leave that behind. And in that square, then they could push each other and should push one another to find out what the best solution would be for their business. And then when they left that square, they could go back to being husband and wife because you can't expect people to drop their friendship or their relationship the whole day at work. But having a time and a space where you can communicate in a way that's truly just task-related is essential. So finding hacks like that. I mean, another example is of 2 founders who were best friends. They started working together. They had a power conflict over who was going to be CEO. And they couldn't discuss it. They were scared to discuss it because they didn't know how to resolve it, and so they just let it fester. And it destroyed their friendship. And so what they're doing now is they're going to a startup shrink. It's literally working with them to talk about, like, why does this matter? Why did the friendship dissolve? And how can you fix it? But better off would have been up front to have had a clear discussion about clarity. And when it became clear that it wasn't clear, to have that discussion in a safe way. But so often as startups, they either avoid conflicts like this, or they engage in conflicts in ways that aren't constructive, like the husband and wife example. So developing a culture in your startup that embraces constructive controversy, where it's encouraged and promoted to disagree, but the people do so in a way that's tactful and constructive, is essential. So those would be the four biggest issues I can see: is clarity, leadership, culture, and conflict management.
So when you are in one of these problematic situations, maybe more of them, and you mentioned a situation where you would actually go to a startup shrink, someone who could help to coach maybe.
Yeah.
So do you have any good recommendation on what type of person could that be, the startup shrink? Who would be good to go to? Should it be someone who is very familiar with working in a startup, or should it rather be someone who can really see it from a distance and ask stupid questions that might be helpful to understand how to resolve it? Who's the right person?
Oh, go ahead.
No, who's the right person to turn to?
I think the most important thing is someone external to your business who doesn't have an interest in your business necessarily, and who everybody on your team respects. And that's the toughest part, is to finding somebody that everybody on the team is going to agree, gee, this person does have a good basis to give us advice. That if it's a friend of one person but not of the other, that's not going to be listened to. So you need to find somebody that everybody will respect. And so it could be another entrepreneur in your space who's been very successful over and over again, that everybody can look at that person and say, yeah, they've really done well in a way that we would like to emulate. Let's go to that person for advice. It could also be somebody who's built up a reputation in your area as a VC who's very good at coaching. It could even be a startup shrink if your incubator or community has that available. Or organizational psychologist who specializes in consulting in startups. I know a lot of friends out here who now are consultants for startups. So there's a lot of different options, be it other entrepreneurs, VCs that are good at coaching, people in your incubator, or even startup consultants. The main quality should be, though, that they have high expertise in working with founders and with startups, and as somebody that everybody in your startup's going to agree that, yeah, this person knows what they're talking about.
Would I'm thinking investors, early stage angel investors. They're definitely, typically, they would have some experience on working with founders and startup teams. But if they are invested in you, would they be a good potential shrink or coach?
There's pluses and minuses. On the one hand, they know the dynamics and they know your firm and they want you to do well. So they have a high motivation to help you fix it. However, they may also have certain biases based on who they're closer to within the company or what they see in the long run of the company. I mean, you see it a lot with VCs that they want the CEO to get kicked out because they'd rather have somebody of their own put in. So as founders, be mindful of what the interests are of the person that you're asking to help you.
Probably a good thing. Be a bit mindful. Think about it twice. Discuss, is that the right person we should turn to for this particular issue? Okay. Fantastic. Lindred, in terms of daily routines or rituals in a team that can help us all every day to avoid conflicts, support our communication, make us all feel part of our team. Do you have a couple of practical examples or suggestions that are easy to implement in a team to support us?
Yeah, a couple. So especially between founders, to build in time to be with one another and to talk one another, be it every day or minimally every week, where you go off by yourselves and you're not in the view of your company and you talk about what's really on your mind, what your challenges are, both in your relationship with your founders and the challenges you see for the company. And know founders that have their daily walk where they leave the business and they go for a walk outside. Other founders who have their morning coffee together and they go out for a coffee and they check in. But to really take the time, I mean, they say that founding a business together is a lot like a marriage. And taking the time to nurture and maintain that relationship is critical. And making sure that you are on the same page as you go forward. So making sure this check-in point is built in among the founding team. Additionally, making sure that there's communication opportunities for the rest of the team. So also your first hires and as you scale. That I've seen town hall meetings weekly or every week, bi-weekly, be very helpful for a lot of companies. That if you start to get dissension or conflicts or politics, having a time and a space where everybody can get together and pose questions to the CEO and the CEO can sort of give what his or her vision is enormously helpful and maintaining alignment. So early on, you agreed on this vision and direction and goal for the company, but you can't just leave it there. Like, you need to have check-in points where you keep slightly, changing your navigation. Maybe we have to shift a little bit. If so, you need to make sure that that's transparently and openly communicated, and having town hall meetings regularly helps a lot. And having any other type of tradition where people can share. And so I was at the startup I was at yesterday. They had a show and tell every week over like Wednesday lunch, where a lot of the employees tinker with the 3D printing machines on the side and come up with ideas that can also lead to business opportunities for them. And so every week over lunch, someone demonstrates a new idea that they've had. And it's very casual, and it's just sort of sharing what people think is really cool about what they're working on in the moment. And I just love that idea of having a fun venue where you can share what people are working on and talk about it in an informal manner. So, I mean, the key takeaway from all these things is communication, of making rituals around communication, open communication, part of your daily life, and not just something that happens accidentally when you have time. That is built in, that you make time for it, and that you know every week when that opportunity is going to be. Another last thing on this is that when you do communicate, having an agenda and having a plan and a timeline for meetings. There's a lot of founders that run horribly inefficient meetings that people hate. There's a startup out here that I really am crazy about called do.com. And it's useful because it can be integrated with Skype, or it also used face-to-face. And it's a software that manages meetings. And so you can put your agenda into the software. It has a timer built in for the different points. You can load in like the back data or the reports people have been working on into the software so everybody can share it at the same time. And the main thing about it I like is the idea of having a guideline for the meeting and a structure and a timer to hold people accountable of, okay, we have 5 minutes to discuss this issue, and then we do need to move on. And also to know that right now we're discussing this issue and not any other issue, and having that level of structure and clarity. Because if that's not there, people start to dislike meetings, they start to avoid them, and you waste time. And so being intentional, not just about when you communicate, but how you communicate, and doing so in a manner that's productive is enormously helpful.
That was a very practical example, and actually several of them. What was the name of the software again?
Do.com. Do.com.
Okay. Makes sense. Definitely. I'll check it out. So, I mean, I would love to continue all day asking more questions, but in respect of time, just the last question, and then we'll wrap up. I'd like to take what we have talked about at team level and look at it at ecosystem level for a second, because you have mentioned a lot of practical examples of things we can all implement right away in our teams to spot potential problems before they become problems, and also how to resolve problems. That's quite a lot here. So, but we see the same again and again in ecosystems around the world. The ecosystems that are really not working. Silicon Valley is very famous for being a highly effective ecosystem that really works. Other countries and cities around the world are trying to build or replicate a model that can work, maybe localize it. So in order to try upfront to eliminate some of the typical reasons for startup failures, is it at all possible to take some of what we have talked about here and elevate it to an ecosystem level and say, is there something, if we educate the entire ecosystem on 2 or 3 things that everybody should do to support startup teams to help them succeed? Are there some advice that you could give that would help highly diverse teams around the world to succeed if the ecosystem support through a special behavior? Is there something you can think of?
Sure. So you see it out here right now that a lot of the incubators anymore, in terms of trying to attract the best startups to their incubator, are offering more and more coursework and opportunities for speakers coming in. And you're seeing now more so that they are starting to bring the speakers around people and team dynamics. So I think offering the chance for startups in your ecosystem to learn about team dynamics, because like what I mentioned earlier, so many of these mistakes that I discussed are made by first-time entrepreneurs. And so bringing in people who founded companies before to talk about their experiences and the mistakes they made is essential. And bringing in people who are experts in the area to talk about diversity, conflict management, negotiation provides enormous value. Leadership is something that can be learned. I don't think that leaders are born. I think they're made. And so bringing in examples of good leaders and bringing in people who do research and consult on leadership is essential. Negotiation is another skill set that I think is truly, some people may be naturally better or worse, but it's something everybody can learn, and it's so easy to learn how to manage conflict well and how to negotiate. So offering trainings and things like that is helpful. So education, I think, is a big thing that incubators can do to bring up the general level of startups in their ecosystem. I also think mentoring is critical. And within your ecosystem, having mentors that have a lot of experience and are effective coaches and know how to coach can add a lot of value to bringing up the level of startups in an ecosystem.
Sounds like this video we're just making now itself can be helpful to ecosystems, hopefully. Yeah, let's hope so. Lindred, you have been delivering a lot of value to a lot of startups through this interview. You have been sharing with us that it's very important to be intentional about people and culture when you create a team. Don't just do things on the fly, even it's tempting to just start coding and build your product, but be intentional when it comes to people and culture. I think that's a really important takeaway from this conversation, at least for me. Something I want to share in our network, definitely. You've been explaining the important factors in sharing passion, the importance of sharing passion, vision, mission, but also have differences in mindset and be a highly diverse team. So you totally support my own theory that there's a lot of value in bringing very different people together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also look at or realize when you bring people together and to acquire diversity, you actually also bring in potential fault lines and challenges, and you have shared a really simple, great exercise for everybody to implement right away. A way to map out your team. Put circles around people who relate to each other for different reasons, maybe due to age or location or specialty or whatever you have in common. Communication frequency could be a lot of things, and then you will see if anyone stands alone once the exercise is done, or there are very too few lines or weak lines, and that's a visual way of spotting where there could be potential problems. So that's a really helpful tool. I hope that everybody try it out in their team right away tomorrow morning. And you have given some advice on finding a good startup shrink to resolve the problems if and when they happen anyway. Even we do our best to avoid them and mitigate the risk. Lindred, it has been exceptionally insightful and helpful. And I'm going to share this conversation with our community, and I'm going to pull you back in later to pick your brain again.
Happy to.
Fantastic. So all I have left now is to thank you and to wish you a good rest of the day at Stanford. And speak to you soon, Lindred.
Okay. Speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.